One of the most persistent myths about the Second World War is that Germany failed to defeat the Soviet Union in 1941 because it wasted time by invading Greece. The argument is appealing in its simplicity. Germany diverted forces south, lost 5 precious weeks, and invaded the Soviet Union too late to conquer Moscow before winter. American war correspondent and historian William Shearer went as far as saying that the invasion of Greece and Yugoslavia was the single most catastrophic decision in Hitler's career. But was this really the case? It's worth mentioning that at the time, all senior officers of the German Supreme Command agreed that conquering the Balkan Peninsula was a strategic prerequisite for Operation Barbarossa. This brings us to the central question: was the invasion of the Soviet Union delayed because of Greek resistance? When you lay out the actual timeline of events and examine the logistical and environmental facts, it becomes clear that this argument is a convenient myth. The story begins not in April of 1941, but in October of 1940, when Italy invaded Greece and suffered a humiliating reversal. By late December 1940, Adolf Hitler had already issued directives both for the future invasion of the Soviet Union and for the Balkan campaign. The two operations were conceived in parallel, not sequentially. The invasion of Greece was ordered on December 13th, while preparations for Operation Barbarossa officially began on December 18th. This fact alone complicates the idea that Greek resistance somehow derailed a fully prepared Eastern offensive. Events accelerated early in 1941. On March 7th, British and Commonwealth forces began landing in mainland Greece, a development that deeply alarmed the German leadership. The concern was not Greece itself, but what British air power might do from Greek bases. In fact, the first British aircraft had already arrived at the Elefsina base 6 days after the Italian invasion. The oil fields at Polesti in Romania were essential to the German war effort, and their vulnerability transformed the Balkan situation into a matter of strategic urgency. As Anthony Beevor has noted, quote, Mussolini's disastrous attack on Greece had achieved precisely what Hitler feared, a British military presence in southeastern Europe. In April 1939, Britain had given Greece a guarantee of support, and General Metaxas had called for help accordingly. End quote. The German invasion of Greece and Yugoslavia began on April 6, 1941. The campaign was swift and decisive. Within a month, Yugoslavia had collapsed and Greece was overrun. By April 28, mainland operations were effectively complete, and the German army could turn its attention to the east. The subsequent airborne assault on Crete in May extended the fighting, but it didn't fundamentally alter the strategic situation. Moreover, the scale of German commitment in the Balkans was limited compared to the massive concentration of forces assembling for Operation Barbarossa. Roughly 10 of the Wehrmacht's 152 divisions were engaged in Greece, and they returned to Germany before the 15th of May, which was the original date set for Operation Barbarossa, according to William Shearer. And this is where Shearer gets the facts wrong. The directive of December 18, 1940, clearly states that preparations requiring longer than 8 weeks must be completed by May 15th. There's no mention of the date for the actual attack. Photos of the original document of the order can be found in the German Federal Archives, and a full translation of the text is available in the Harvard Law School Library. In one of the military conferences in December of 1940, Hitler had envisaged the end of May as the time to strike, only if the weather was dry enough. The spring of 1941 in Eastern Europe was exceptionally wet. The seasonal thaw turned roads into mud and rivers into swollen barriers. Under such conditions, large-scale mechanized warfare was not merely difficult, it was often impossible. Logistics compounded the problem. The German army was preparing for the largest invasion in history, yet its supply system was already under strain. In November of 1940, Major General Eduard Wagner, who served as Quartermaster General, estimated that the army had sufficient fuel to advance a maximum of 800 kilometers, with enough food and ammunition for a 20-day operation. After that, the army would have to pause for resupply. In hindsight, these calculations were remarkably accurate. Coordination with Germany's allies further influenced the timetable. Romania and Finland, both crucial to the campaign, required time to mobilize and integrate into the broader operational plan. These factors, taken together with the environmental constraints, meant that a mid-May launch was unrealistic, regardless of events in Greece. The final date for the invasion emerged through operational orders by the General Staff, parts of which can be found in General Halder's diary. A letter from Hitler to Mussolini sent on June 21st indicates that the attack order was given to the armed forces just hours before the invasion actually commenced. In his book, The Second World War, John Keegan explicitly rejects the idea that Operation Barbarossa was delayed because of the Balkan campaign. The Balkan campaign, often depicted by historians as an unwelcome diversion from Hitler's long-laid plan to attack the Soviet Union and as a disabling interruption of the timetable he had marked out for its inception, had been, in fact, no such thing. It had been successfully concluded even more rapidly than his professional military advisors could have anticipated, while the choice of D-Day for Barbarossa had always depended not on the sequence of contingent events, but on the weather and objective military factors. The same factors dictated large-scale offensives in the following years. Operation Blue commenced on June 28, 1942, and Operation Citadel on July 5, 1943. On the Soviet side, the summer offensive of 1944, which destroyed Army Group Center, was also launched on June 22nd. And that brings us to the next question. Was Operation Barbarossa destined to fail simply because the invasion couldn't be launched in May? Here, the myth begins to unravel completely. The first weeks of Operation Barbarossa witnessed a series of dramatic German victories, but these were accompanied by heavy losses and a string of Soviet counterattacks. In fact, the Red Army proved far more resilient than the Germans anticipated, even in the first hours of the invasion. The 45th Infantry Division, for example, sustained 311 casualties, including 21 officers, in its failed attempt to capture the city of Brest on the first day. And it took the Germans a full week to finally capture the city. In Lithuania, the Soviet 12th and 3rd Mechanized Groups reacted quickly and counterattacked the 1st and 6th Panzer Divisions. It took the Germans 3 days to destroy the Soviet tank divisions before they could continue their advance north. This counterattack was overshadowed by the success of the 56th Motorized Corps, which advanced 350 kilometers in 4 days. In Ukraine, the advance of Army Group South was even harder. The opposing Soviet formations were far better prepared when compared with their compatriots to the north. Consequently, Soviet resistance in the south was far more coherent, forcing Germans to fight their way slowly across western Ukraine throughout July and August. When the German forces advanced deeper into Soviet territory, their offensive power was already waning by August, as their supply line stretched over vast distances. Soviet pressure against Army Group Center was so great that on August 28th, its commander, Fedor von Bock, reported that his forces are near breaking point. It was obvious that the German army reached a point of operational exhaustion well before the onset of severe winter conditions. The idea that a few additional weeks in May would have prevented this outcome is based on nothing but fantasy. In September, Army Group Center replenished its losses and commenced the final assault on Moscow on October 1st. Meanwhile, the Red Army retained its significant reserves even after the catastrophic losses of the summer, and Soviet industry was being relocated east of the Urals. The scale of the conflict far exceeded German expectations. In this context, timing was only one variable among many, and it wasn't the most decisive one. General Halder admits in his diary that the General Staff underestimated Russia's strength and resolve. The whole situation makes it increasingly plain that we have underestimated the Russian colossus. At the onset of the war, we reckoned with about 200 enemy divisions. Now, we have already counted 360. These divisions indeed are not armed and equipped according to our standards, and their tactical leadership is often poor. But there they are, and if we smash a dozen of them, the Russians simply put up another dozen. Gregory Litka reinforces this view by highlighting the success of local counterattacks by operational reserves in December of 1941. These local Soviet attacks evolved into a general counteroffensive that rippled across the Moscow front, penetrating its weak points and threatening German forces with encirclement. For the first time in the war, large numbers of German troops faced the prospect of being surrounded and annihilated on the battlefield. They had little choice but to retreat. Historiographically, there's little support for the notion that Greek resistance determined the outcome of Operation Barbarossa. The persistence of this myth is understandable. It offers a simple, almost elegant explanation for a complex failure. It suggests that victory was within reach and that it was undone only by a misstep in the Balkans. But history rarely conforms to such tidy narratives. Germany didn't lose the war because of Greek resistance. It lost because it embarked on a campaign whose scale it fundamentally misunderstood, with resources that were insufficient to sustain it, and against an opponent far more resilient than it had imagined. The delay to Operation Barbarossa was real, but its causes lay primarily in mud, logistics, and planning, not in the mountains of Greece.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of